أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر وعبر WNZK راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern, and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on WNZK 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan with Layla Al-Husseini. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues with your host, Layla Al-Husseini.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Good morning. If you want to see how ugly things are in the Middle East, today the movie A Private War will do that. American war correspondent Marie Colvin was killed when Syrian government bombs hit the Baba Amr Media Center in Homs in 2012. Her family is suing President Bashar al-Assad for targeting foreign journalists in Syria. Here in the U.S., journalists face possibly ugly consequences, but nobody is suing President Trump as yet. He calls them the enemy of the people and fake news. To discuss the ugly realities and challenges faced by journalists in the Middle East and in Syria and in Palestine and America, we have with us a group of distinguished guests who will shed light on those realities and challenges. We have with us Mr. Arikat, a Washington-based Palestinian journalist, Mr. Sakher Edries, Secretary General of the Syrian Journalists Association, and Ms. Delinda Hanley, editor of the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs. Before we discuss our discussions, I would like to ask our audience, in case they need to comment or ask questions or take part in our conversation, to call us on 248-557-3300. That's 248-557-3300. Let's start our discussion now, and let's start with the situation in the U.S. So I would like to ask all three guests of ours about their take on the relationship between President Trump and the media in the U.S. So let's start with Ms. Hanley.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be on your show again, Dr. Gawad. Well, this morning's news, Twitter has banned Alex Jones and his Twitter site InfoWars from Twitter, and that's a good thing. I think in this climate in the United States, with everyone so hot-tempered, and people like Alex Jones, who calls for attacks on journalists, get a microphone that they never would have had in past decades. It is dangerous for journalists who criticize the president, criticize Israel. It's just more dangerous than it has ever been. But nothing, and compared to being a journalist in the Middle East, especially Israel and Palestine and Syria.
Ms. Hanley, would you please, for the benefit of our Middle Eastern or Arab audience who may not have heard about Alex Jones, can you give them just a brief account on who he is, what he does?
So he has recently threatened reporters and told people to get his supporters to get battle rifles ready against news reporters and others. That's kind of a serious thing. He chased after Oliver Darcy, a reporter at CNN who's covered InfoWars. He called Darcy a charlatan, and he's called CNN a giant fraud. He gets into verbal arguments with people, but he's also telling people to get their rifles out against journalism, and that's kind of
my goodness.
Scary.
Yes. All right. Mr. Sakher, it's your turn. What's your take on the relationship between Mr. Trump and the media?
Hi, hello. Firstly, I would like to thank you for this opportunity. Actually, the relationship is going from bad to worse, and as your guest said, it never happened since the last decades about this relationship. Trump used to really cross the border by threatening and losing the trust between him and the media. This, I guess, Trump is, I guess he's acting like a wrestling instead of a president toward the journalist, which is like shows like a negative indicator about the freedom of expression and the press in the United States. That, of course, will reflect negatively the other parts of the world.
How is that?
Well, usually the freedom of expression, it takes values from some Western countries like United States or France or other Western countries. If the dictators, they saw that, they watched that this relationship, the threat from president, president of the, let us say, relatively strongest country in the world, who respects the values of freedom of expression, I guess they will copy his action, they will copy his behavior, then that will negatively affect the freedom of expression in other words, because if he came to be like a sample, so that will be really a bad sample of other countries.
Right. Mr. Arikat, before we talk about the situation faced by Palestinian journalists in Palestine, I want to get your take on the relationship between Trump and the media in the U.S.
Well, it has always been, good morning, everyone. The relationship since day one, was actually based on controversy. I mean, Mr. Trump is no new subject or person to the media. He's been around for a very, very long time, has always thrived on controversy with the media as a private citizen, as a businessman. Historically, it's just his thing. He'd like to have about a two with the media all the time. When he was elected president, this became more intense. And then, he thrives on basically casting the media, as he says all the time, as the enemy of the people, because it is something that basically works with his base. His base gets riled up. His base blames everything on the media. They have contempt for the media. They think that the media is elitist in many ways. They think they don't know what real America is all about. And, of course, many of these elements, as we have seen in the rallies and so on, are basically speak of a type of America that is quite tailored to them. It is based on ethnicity and race and religion and all these things. So, yes, Mr. Trump has been, in that kind of sort of combative posture with the media all along, because it does serve his purpose and it does galvanize his base.
Ms. Hanley, do you think that the damage resulting from Mr. Trump's treatment of the media would stay in America beyond Mr. Trump's era?
I think it could change very quickly, actually, if Mr. Trump, after he leaves office. But I think we have seen the power of the media in this country, despite the attacks on the media, from Bob Woodward's recent book about the Trump administration, the power of that anonymous editorial in the New York Times, attacking the administration, or attacking our president, really. I mean, these media exposés could take down the president, and that shows the power, and that also shows why the media is having such a troubled relationship with our president. He's scared to death of them.
Mr. Edries, do you agree with Ms. Hanley?
Well, yeah, the media is strong in America and other part of countries, other part of the world is looking at it and following that. And I don't think that is going to continue. Basically, it doesn't exist, the control of the media, because the media in America is not like a state media. It's a free media.
And Mr. Arikat, are you optimistic?
Well, yeah. I mean, the media in the United States is strong. It's a well-rooted institution. I teach a media course at American University, and we go through the media historically in this country. And it's not something that you can dismiss. It has always been a pillar of not only what political America is all about, but a pillar of the basic elements of the foundation of America. So it has always been there. Has always played a very strong role. It has always influenced public opinion and so on, and will continue to do so. I think there are times when the media are on certain issues, when the media shirks its responsibilities or does not take the role that it should take or dismisses whatever aspect of a certain story, as we have seen during the lead up to the invasion of Iraq, with the issue of weapons of mass destruction. But then quickly the media recuperates and comes forward and says we made a mistake and so on. So I think it is very strong and it's very healthy and it's very, very diverse and adheres to a set of principles of checks and balances and so on that keeps it on the straight and narrow path, so to speak. So, yes, I am. I mean, we have seen the media improve constantly. Sometimes we feel that we are inundated with cable and news stories that are in pursuit of the breaking news, and simply competing for ratings and so on. And that tends to get us away from the essence of the story. But quick enough, we go back to the essence of the story because there are so many different outlets and forums and so on for the media that it does give you reassurance that it will always be there. Now, what impact this kind of rhetoric that we hear the president coming out of the president regarding the media, what impact it will have on the media, I think in terms professionally it will not. It will always be there. But in terms of widening the gap between the base, his base in this case, and the media, and that in the long term will have a negative effect.
Ms. Hanley, President Trump was born and raised in New York, in the U.S. So how do you explain the attitude he has? In treating the media and the press, he seems like a person or a leader from the third world. So how do you explain that attitude that he got?
That's an excellent question. I think he was used to being adulated by the media. He used to secretly call in for the media and not say who he was, telling them information about how wonderful Donald Trump has, done this and done that. He used to really like media attention, but now when it's turned against him, he's not so happy with it. I don't think he enjoys reading. I don't think he brags about reading newspapers. He is not. He doesn't really want to inform himself about world affairs. We're seeing. So it's an interesting relationship he has with the media, and I also, not to turn it away from the current discussion, but the media, when it comes to Israel and Palestine or the Middle East in general, has never been very fair and never given the region we care about, our listeners care about, a fair shake. And that is continuing, but stories are breaking through. Like the Gaza March of Return stories actually made it into the newspapers and TV. But usually there's a protective coat that reporters give to Israel.
When we come back, we will continue our discussion.
When it comes to reproductive medicine, IVF Michigan Fertility Centers are the recognized leaders. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 5 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. As a founding member of IVF Michigan Fertility Centers, Dr. Nicholas Shama is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. Dr. Shama has performed over 10,000 IVF cases and has helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. American board certified in both obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology and infertility, Dr. Nicholas Shama is a very caring, compassionate, expert physician that understands not only the medical but also the emotional toil of infertility on his patients. When it's time, get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio. Call toll-free 855-952-9600, 855-952-9600.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
Life is a nonprofit charity that's provided humanitarian aid and development to people and communities for over 25 years, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Please help improve these efforts. Make your tax-deductible donation to Life now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Valley. We are discussing freedom of the media, of the press, both in America and the Middle East. We will get to the Middle East in a second, but I still want to go to our guest, Mr. Edries, and ask you the same question. Mr. Trump was born and raised in New York, in the U.S., so how do you explain his attitude, the attitude he has? He sounds like a person from the third world, and when it comes to treating the press.
Well, I guess in the past he used to attract media, but now he knows that he's gonna commit some violations or make some mistakes, and he will be criticized from the media. And he's doing that, is considering maybe that as a preventive strike that against the scandals that he may be exposed by the media, especially in the election. The last, lately we heard or read about the election scandals. After that, he threatened if he stepped down, that would cause an economic collapse. This is, frankly, I call it, this is behavior of gangs, or itself, it's like a bullying or threatening the people. So I guess it's kind of preventive steps of preventive strikes, strike against the media. to show that media is like counterfeiting news or like spreading a false news. It's kind of preventive steps because he knows very well that he's gonna exposed by media lately. It's not necessarily to be now, maybe after a few years. So that's why after that he will remind the people that he used to criticize the media, he doesn't believe the media or he doesn't believe in media. I guess it's kind of preventive step.
And Mr. Arikat, not only is Mr. Trump opposed to the freedom of the press, the media here in the U.S., but he also tends to admire strong men. Like, he even talked about how pleased he was with the election of the Chinese president as president for life. How he liked Mr. Putin, a strong man, Mr. Sisi of Egypt as a strong man, and so forth. So how do you explain his personality?
Well, it's very simple. I mean, we have to remember that Mr. Trump does not come from a political tradition. He's been a CEO, he's been a businessman, he's headed companies and so on. And these people tend to be dictatorial. I mean, it's not something that is new in the business sector. Those who are at the helm of the major companies tend to wield a great deal of power. It is all about them. On top of that, he has a very narcissistic personality. It is all about him. It has always been about him. He, in fact, generated, in the past, I mean, we've been reading about Mr. Trump. In my case, I've been reading about Mr. Trump for the better part of the last 30 years. So there's nothing new. He thrives on these controversies. He casts himself in that light, and he does admire, the ability to be strong, the ability to dictate terms, the ability to extort and exact concessions and so on from those who are in a weaker position, whether it's negotiating a real estate deal or, as we have seen when he was running The Apprentice. So there's a long, long history behind Mr. Trump that shows that this man is enamored by strength and the ability to make decisions and be decisive on his own terms, so to speak. So there is no surprise in that. He thinks that the government should be his playground in terms that he can decide whatever he wants. And let's not forget, I mean, the American president, in all honesty, wields a great deal of power. There is no other office like it in the world, but he still wants one. He wants to be able to say, this is good and this is bad, this media is doing its job and this isn't, and so on. So it does transcend just the issues of media. He has historically admired those strong negotiators across from him at the table, and then he takes a great deal of pleasure when he is able to make them acquiesce to his own demands and so on. He treats the media as such. So, and he has, as many narcissistic people would, and as many people who are in positions of wealth and power and so on have done. He thrives on saying this is what reality is, this is what the truth is. He has his own version, and I think we were giving sort of an exposure to that when Kellyanne Conway, one of his advisors, early on said that Mr. Trump has an alternative truth. I mean, people began to speak about a different kind of truth, alternative truth, and so on. So we've seen things in this administration that were never thought of before. I mean, it's not, truth cannot have an alternative truth, and so on. So yes, that really goes. His conduct with the media is consistent with his personality, and he raised a very good issue. I mean, he was raised in New York and so on, but he appeals basically to ruler America in terms of culture and so on. So he knows how to manipulate this issue. He's a master manipulator. He is not someone who is not sophisticated in that sense. He's very sophisticated, has worked with the media all along, used, as Delinda said, used to submit the stories and so on that are intended to create controversy and gossip and so on. So admiring strong men in this sense does not surprise me.
Let's move on to the movie. Ms. Hanley, Private War is a documentary about what happened to Marie Colvin and her colleagues while covering the civil war in Syria, in Homs. First, are you planning to see the movie, and what are your observations about Syria and the press in general?
So I have not seen the movie. I am looking forward to seeing the movie. It shows when a family really sticks up for their murdered relative, that they can get things done and get it in front of the public. So anyway, the news in Syria I think everyone has been so conflicted about the Syria issue in this country. Even Arab Americans are on both sides of the Syria thing, but everyone is against the bloodshed, the horrors that have occurred in Syria, and it's just amazing that that it hasn't stopped, and it's not stoppable. I don't think Americans have no business telling countries what to do. Anyway, that is an issue that totally perplexes me. Unlike the Israel-Palestine issue, that's so black and white, it's a horror story in Syria.
We'll talk about the Palestinian-Israeli relationship in a second, but Mr. Edries, the situation in Syria when it comes to the press and the media, is it any better than what happened in 2012 when Marie Colvin was killed? Mr. Edries.
Hi.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, in the Arab world or in the Middle East, most of the Middle East countries, to be a journalist, that is enough to get thrown, to be jailed or to be in jail. Such charges will be in some Western countries. It's really enough to be laughable in the most Western countries. The journalism in Syria before 2011, it was the same, but undercover. It used to be a state media. We have a lot of stories that journalists were jailed or detained because of their freedom or for some articles, or they were removed or dismissed from their job because of that. To be a journalist in Syria, that means you have to be a state journalist. That's all. The situation before 2011 wasn't better, but it was undercover. Arab journalists or Syrian journalists always conditions of journalists. It was only you have to give credits to the state, to the governor. Otherwise, you will be either removed or dismissed from the work.
Mr. Edries, have you heard of any journalist, Syrian or foreign, in Syria who was killed in covering the civil war since 2011? I mean, other than Marie Colvin and her colleagues.
Well, Marie Colvin and Rima Oshlik, her colleague, also James Foley, he was killed. We have also in Syrian Journalists Association, we actually documented about 435 journalists since 2011 till 2018 last month. A lot of journalists, they were killed. If you are talking about the foreign journalists, I'm talking here now about also unknown fate about journalists. We have about 37 journalists. They have unknown fate in Syria, regardless whether they are foreign or Syrian journalists or non-Syrian journalists. We know a lot of, we document a lot of names. And some names they are suing now Bashar al-Assad, especially the Mary Colvin family and James Foley. Of course, there is Jelly Jack. He was the first foreign journalist who was killed. He died in Homs. Jelly Jack, and there is Oliver Voisin, and there is a lot of journalists also. The Mika Yamamoto, AFD Bay, all of those they were died in Syria during after 2011.
We will continue our discussion after the break.
The Rama Relief Foundation provides humanitarian aid into areas inside of war-torn Syria, as well as aid to the refugees who have fled to the neighboring countries in the Middle East. The foundation offers food baskets, container shipment, mental health, education, soup kitchens, and more. Go to ramarelief.org or call 248-990-4247. Any donation amount made to Rama will go to sustaining many lives. Call now 248-990-4247.
Are you going to start a restaurant or grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design. New location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796. When you're looking for the best in optical care, Dr. Imad Nakash is your doctor to see. With years of experience and thousands of successful procedures performed, you can trust your eyes to Dr. Imad Nakash. See Dr. Imad Nakash and his professional staff for your eye care needs. There's 2 locations to serve you. In Hazel Park, call 248-336-3937. 248-336-3937. In Rochester Hills, call 248-299-3937. That's 248-299-3937.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We are talking about freedom of the press, of the media, both in the U.S. and in the Middle East. We have with us Mr. Saeed Arikat, Mr. Sakher Edries, and Ms. Hanley Delinda. Now, before we turn to the Palestinian issue, I want to get back to Mr. Edries and ask you, Mr. Edries, about the 36 missing journalists. And my question is, are there any efforts, local, regional, or international, to find out, to locate, to find out whatever happened to those people?
Well, the efforts never stop about to locate them. But sometimes the efforts resulted in releasing them, like what usually happens by paying some money to release them. Sometimes we have no information about them, but the efforts never stop because they are detained in different places. They are detained by different parties, some of them by ISIS, some of them claim that the Syrian regime detained them, some of them some extremists and terrorists, some of them unknown parties who kidnapped those journalists. we have kind of, let us say, we suspect that they were killed and or they are detained for a proper time that maybe utilize them through those groups or battalions or the extremists. So, as I told you, it never stops the trial, the efforts, but unfortunately, sometimes we come to we reach to a closed wall to know them or to locate them.
And do we know who is suspected of murdering them?
Well, not I can't give you like a final answer for that, because some of them are claimed, some extremist battalions, they claim that those journalists are with them. For example, like ISIS, like some unknown battalions, or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or some opposition from the battalion of opposition, or some of the Syrian regime, but no one really admit that those are with them. But due to some investigations that it's been done either by Syrian Journalists Association or other like RSF Reporters Sans Frontières or CBJ, so we could like come to a semi-conclusion, but till now it's not yet defined exactly where are those journalists.
Mr. Arikat, you are a Palestinian journalist, and you hear and see and know the difference between an Israeli journalist and a Palestinian journalist. Tell us about that.
Well, definitely there is a great deal. To begin with, our resources as Palestinian journalists are extremely limited. I write for a Palestinian newspaper that has been published in East Jerusalem, occupied East Jerusalem for decades, for a very, very long time, since 1950, 51. And for the better part of its existence, it has been under occupation, you know. So there were times, for instance, when my newspaper would publish blank pages, I mean, many of them, because the censor would cut it out. And then it took the Israelis years to say, this is embarrassing, you got to put anything. So there was a time when you really had to put any kind of junk just to, you know, just to fill the space. Otherwise, you go to prison. That's one. Second, there is virtually no one in the newspaper, and it is really the because it is subject to Israeli publishing laws and so on, and under military rule and all these things. It has a good side effect, which is, you know, it has made it completely independent. It is completely self-financed. It depends on its own finances. So it has the ability. It does not behold the ability to report what's going on, and it functions in a fashion that is both, you know, sometimes resented by the Palestinian Authority, the other different groups, and so on, and always resented by the Israelis. So that's one. Second, access. I mean, you know, this is the thing. I know Washington, and I've been in Washington for a very long time, and I was able throughout the years, to establish many contacts in the corridors of power, especially in the State Department and so on, because I go there every day. I keep my office in the bullpen in the State Department and all these things. But access for us is very limited. It's very limited, and it is scarce. And you really have to sort of claw it out. It's not something that is easily taken. You don't, you know, you are at the bottom of the list, you know, simply because you are viewed as being, you know, weak or being not able to compete with the big guys and the powerful things. But also, the flip side of that is it's also, you know, because you are all alone, because you have no access most of the time and so on, it does give you a different kind of forum where you can exercise your ability or exercise your whatever little access that you have to maximize reporting and so on. So the difference between Israeli newspapers, let's say, functioning in America, in Washington, and Palestinian journalists in Washington, there's day and night. Although I must admit that, let's say, I know most Israeli journalists in town, and I deal with them, I talk with them all the time. We exchange stories and all these things. And sometimes they have the same kind of difficulty. Definitely a paper now, a paper like Haaretz, which is the preeminent Israeli newspaper, finds more difficulty in reporting than, let's say, small newspapers such as Israel Hayom, that is financed by Sheldon Adelson, because he does have access to the White House and he finances that newspaper, so they have better access. It's a very, very complex issue on reporting from Washington. But nonetheless, we plug along. There's also, unfortunately, a big vacuum in a support system that ought to be there but isn't, by Arab journalists. They should come, let's say, to the briefing. They never come to the briefing to, let's say, give me because I do tackle the Palestinian issue all the time from the briefing room. So you don't have that kind of support group that should have been there. So, and that is, the blame falls squarely on Arab journalists and in this regard. Also, there's not a lack of aggressiveness, because if you are a one-man show or two-man show or something, or you're on your own without a group, then your ability to impact or your ability to report regresses, and it's limited, and so on. Although I do get enough support from the association of the press corps in the State Department, for instance, they are quite supportive to me all the time. So it is just not one thing; it's many things.
Ms. Hanley, does Israeli journalists enjoy the kind of freedom of the press that the U.S. journalists here enjoy, even under President Trump?
Well, I do agree with Dr. Arikat. The Israeli press from Haaretz enjoys some freedom. I mean, and they're highly respected. Their voices are highly respected here. We've invited them to our conference on the Israel lobby each year, and they can speak. They can say things that the American press would never say. Israelis can offer a really wonderful voice. I'm going back to Dr. Arikat's comment about access and finances. You have to, international journalists have to have access to these war zones and be safe in those zones. Do you remember when Anthony Shadid had to sneak into Syria to cover the civil war in 2012, and he had an asthma attack going back over to Lebanon and died? I mean, the governments don't let journalists in. American journalists are rarely allowed into Gaza to report, and we don't give the platforms to Palestinian journalists that we should in this country and all over. I haven't heard about these 36 missing journalists. You don't see that in the news, in the Washington Post, that Israel is bombing Syria all the time. You need journalists on the spot, in safety, reporting on these crimes, and access and financial support from newspapers, providing journalists with, vests to protect themselves and support to keep them safe when they're in war zones. It's vital, and we're not giving enough access to journalists.
When we come back after the break, we will discuss the future of freedom of the press in the Middle East.
A سوق زمزم الواقع على 24065 أورشد لك في مدينة فارمington هيلز ترحب بالجالية العربية والكلدانية. تنزيلة كبيرة على عموم المواد الغذائية في يوم الأربعاء من كل أسبوع. لا تنسوا فريش كاري اوت جميع انواع المعجنات، وايضا صواني الكمبو المشكله والصمون الحار. لحوم حلال الجاليه العربيه والاسلاميه الملحمه باداره قصاب الجاليه المعروف سلوان جربوع. زوروهم على 24065 اورشد لك في مدينه فارمington هيلز او اتصلوا بهم على 248-476-0300. اسواق زمزم للمذاقي عنوان لجميع طلباتكم. اتصلوا على 248-476-0300. اسواق زمزم للمعامله الراقية وكرم الضيافة عنوان.
بدأناه معكم وعاهدناكم على أن نستمر بمزيد من المتعة والعروض الحصرية على قناتي زي ألوان وزي أفلام. زي ألوان هي أول وأكبر قناة مسلسلات عربية هندية في أمريكا. أضخم الإنتاجات، مسلسلات حصرية، ومع زي أفلام فأنتم على موعد مع مغامرة جديدة كل يوم لاكتشاف سحر بوليوود. تابعوا حصريا قناتي زي ألوان وزي أفلام الآن في أمريكا على ديش نتورك وسلينج تي في.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion of freedom of the press in America and the Middle East. We have with us a group of distinguished guests, Ms. Delinda Hanley, Mr. Sakher Edries, and Mr. Arikat. Now, Mr. Edries, as you know, in the Middle East, we have several civil wars going on in Syria, in Yemen, in Libya, and elsewhere. Give us an idea about how local journalists on the ground are dealing with their duties in covering the war.
Well, now in the Middle East especially, a day doesn't pass without a journalist being pursued, censored, kidnapped, harassed, imprisoned, or even killed. But now that journalists and photographers, especially in the Middle East, adapted to the dangerous security situation in Syria, for example, I'm talking about Syria now, they really developed a new tactics to continue their work, either by working undercover or like seeking the support and help by the local people in Syria. The situation in Syria, if I want to emphasize or focus in Syria, it's like the journalist really, he puts his soul and his palm in his hand and his pen, let us say relatively, then he goes to search for the facts. They are on the front line and they are targeted always because they are considered the weakest party, because they are targeted by everyone to prevent them from transferring the facts and information. Because their work is to really transfer and transmit and to inform people about what's happening. And because of the Middle East is really mostly governed by dictatorships, it's considered an enemy for the media, because this dictatorship, they consider the media is their enemy, because they transfer the violations and that are committed by those presidents, let us say, or decision makers against their people. The situation is very dangerous there. The media and journalism is considered really a crime in Middle East, in the most countries of Middle East. And there is no solution, I guess now, but the solution is by changing the principles of Middle East, changing the principles of freedom of expression, press, the freedom of press in the Middle East, especially in Syria. As I told you before, that it was the journalism and media, it was a state media. One criticized in 2013, one journalist, he was killed by Syrian regime, his name Mus'ab al-Adallah, because he started to criticize. A lot of journalists, they were removed and dismissed from their jobs because they show some indications that they want to criticize the violations. The situation there is very dangerous, as I said, and I guess really they need to be protected from strong countries or decision maker countries because no one is protecting them. No one is protecting them. They are targeted by every and each party, whether the governors or the regime or the battalions or the extremists or the terrorists, because they are trying to do their work by transferring the information, by collecting the data, and to tell people about the truth, this truth that enable them to take the decisions.
Now, Mr. Arikat, we just heard Mr. Edries talk about Mus'ab al-Adallah, who was killed because there are no protections for journalists doing their job. Now, I want you to take us to Gaza and Palestine. The division between Hamas in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority on the West Bank. Now, does that division have any impact on how journalists on the ground do perform their jobs? I mean, are they state journalists, so they have to comply to what Hamas wants them to say or the Palestinian Authority wants them to say?
That's a very good question. Definitely the Palestinian journalists, both on the West Bank and in Gaza, work under extremely constrained circumstances in every sense. They're mainly targeted by the Israelis. You know, as you've seen in the last few months, the Palestinian journalists are targeted for assassination on purpose by Israeli snipers. I mean, you know, with their clearly marked as threats, as we have seen time and again. 3 journalists have been killed this year so far. More than 17 have been, or 18 have been injured. In the West Bank, journalists are beaten and thrown out and so on most of the time. Not only Palestinian journalists, but even foreign journalists who, as Delinda, I think, alluded to, who mainly stay in Tel Aviv and never go to the Palestinian areas and so on. They report whatever they report. They report it from the Israeli side. I'm not saying they're biased. I'm saying that by being contained or constrained to a certain area, their ability and their exposure is quite limited. Now, for Palestinian journalists, who are now, as we speak, there are scores, dozens, I don't want to say hundreds, but there are dozens in Israeli prisons. There are many that are constantly harassed and detained for a day or two by the Palestinian Authority, because the Palestinian Authority also don't like sometimes what they write about them. So it is really, they have their work cut out for them. And, although there was historically, since the early 20s and the 30s, there was a thriving underground press in Palestine. First against the British, then against the Zionist attack groups like Haganah and so on, and all these things, reporting on the Palestinian revolt of '36. Then under the Jordanian rule in the West Bank and others, in the Arab areas of Israel. So it is really, they have been quite creative and so on in coming up with ways and methods to convey information, because that is the essence of journalism at the end of the day, to keep people informed. So they find creative ways to report, but they are restricted, they are constrained, their ability to report is limited, and they cannot move. I mean, no journalist from Gaza can go to the West Bank, for instance, and vice versa, because Israel prevents that. So they are really contained into a very small area. When they report mainly on incidents that are taking place. So, indeed, the Palestinian, the Arab journalist, as was explained, eloquently just a little while ago, and the lack of freedom of press anywhere in the Arab world, and the inability to report, or the virtual hegemony of, let's say, oil money that now has basically come to control all press in the Arab world and gear it to report in their favor, so to speak. It is replicated in Palestine, except on a microcosm scale, and it's a small. Many of Palestinian journalists that work for Arab media outlets are also, sometimes they have to toe the line of what this country who is financing this outfit dictates, so to speak. So, yes, it is a constant struggle. It's very difficult, and there's the intensity of the struggle makes it far more difficult because things are happening. There are flashpoints all the time, and there are so many issues. You have the checkpoint, you have the wall, you have the inability to move from one place to another. All this makes for a very, very difficult reporting.
Ms. Hanley, how do you see the future for freedom of the press in the Middle East?
I think it will happen. It is happening. Just the fact that images from the March of Return did make it into the U.S. press finally. The internet lets images, a picture takes, it says a million words. People can't ignore these stories, these images. You can put all the journalists in prison, like they're trying to do in the in Israeli prisons, but someone else will take up a camera or a cell phone and record the horrors that are going on all over in the Middle East. Citizen journalists. I think it's important that the international press uses these images. I think we have this self-censorship in the United States, at least, where the images are there, the stories don't get in the press. We have some kind of protection system going on. Even in England, I think BBC changed a caption because they got too much flack when Israel bombed the mother and the pregnant woman and her child. Just we have to open our press in the United States and England and the world to accept these alternative stories that we haven't heard before.
Delinda Hanley, thank you very much. I also extend my thanks to our guests, Arikat and Sakher Edries.